Hi there, everyone. Welcome back to another edition of Making Sense with Move to Amend. I am hosting this week. My name is Keyan Bliss. I am the grassroots director for the Move to Amend Coalition. And we are getting an emergency alert for the state of California's public health home order. So if you're hearing that beeping in the background, that is us knowing that we are back on lockdown. And that is a little bit of what is driving our conversation today as well. Joining me today, or just give a basic introduction for Move to Men for those of you that are joining us for the first time. We are a nonpartisan national grassroots coalition of over 500 organizations and over 470,000 individuals committed to social, political, and economic justice and equity, ending corporate rule, and creating a vibrant democratic society that is genuinely accountable and representative of all people and the planet, and not just corporate power and property interests. So together we are calling for the We the People Amendment to the U.S. Constitution that would unequivocally state that that constitutional rights and inalienable rights belong to human beings only, not corporations, and that money is not a form of protected speech under the First Amendment, so that we can actually regulate it within our political processes and guarantee that all people have access to our elected officials and political processes, regardless of how much money they have. And with that, I have a wonderful guest and ally and comrade that is joining me today. I'm going to introduce it to from Public Health Advocates, Dr. Flojuane Cofer. Go ahead.
Hi, how are you? It's great to be here today, Keyan. Thank you so much for that. And snap to Move to Amend. It's a real honor to be on today.
Absolutely. I've been wanting to get you on the show to talk with me because you are doing amazing work here in California and in Sacramento as well, and really just it's just awesome that I enjoy having these conversations with you around everything that's going on. So just to open us up a little bit, I'd love for you to just give a little bit of introduction about what you do at Public Health Advocates, and just explain a little bit about Public Health Advocates.
Sure. So we are a statewide nonprofit that works specifically in policy advocacy. And so we take the ideas that come around, how we should change our environment. And when I say environment, I mean all of the ways in which we move throughout spaces, and think about racial justice, think about social equity, infusing in anti-capitalist values, and really trying to figure out how we can take good care of one another, because it's in our interest, it's in our public health interest. And so my background is I'm an epidemiologist. I found myself increasingly at the intersection of what we know and what we do, and wanted to be on the side of taking what we know and figuring out what we should do with it, which sort of gradually eased me into this work. I definitely find a great home at Public Health Advocates for this work because of the commitment that we have throughout the state of not just doing equity work, but trying to live our equity principles. And so our focus is as much around how do we run a just organization, as well as, and then how do we pass policies both at the big P level of legislation as well as at the little p level of implementation, to make sure that those principles are lived and are codified and are part of just the way that we operate. So that's kind of our work in a nutshell, I guess. We have staff all across the state in Los Angeles, in the Central Valley, as well as Sacramento is kind of as far north as we go, but we work in communities that are even farther north and farther south than those, and our focus is really just on state and local policy.
Mm-hmm. That is amazingly comprehensive, and honestly, I'm just always inspired by the level of work and just and commitment that you have into this work, and within movements as a whole. Because really, I mean, you're speaking to an audience of within Move to Men that really believes in systemic transformation, not just reform of our current systems, ones that actually prioritize people and our well-being, as opposed to just property and corporate interests. And that really kind of goes into what we at Move to Men have identified as one of the key problems, is we are not a self-governing people. Contrary to popular belief, we are not. We have been conditioned. We are not a genuine democracy where people are free to participate. The vast majority of us have been excluded from the political process, literally from day one. Particularly women, Black, Indigenous, people of color, Latinx people, immigrants, and even non-property owning white people for like the vast majority of our history. And while we've managed to, amend the U.S. Constitution 27 times over the past 230 years, we still haven't really answered the key question of who is a person worthy of protection. But we have seen at the judicial level, the Supreme Court seeing fit to insert the corporation, a creation of government of itself, into the founding document as a person under the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause, which you are well aware, you and I are well aware, was explicitly intended to protect our civil liberties as African Americans and people of color. And from there, it's crazy.
It's insulting.
Mm-hmm. Right. It's really like, like we can say here in the United States and only in the United States has a corporation been considered a person with better protection than its own people, particularly women. Like women weren't the 14th Amendment wasn't applied to women until as late as 1971's a case called Reed versus Reed, whereas Citizens United, or the impetus for Citizens United came from 1886. 1886, Santa Clara County versus Southern Pacific Railroad, right here in California. And right, a little bit of Supreme Court history there for you.
Thank you. I love that. That's something new I learned today.
Right. So one of the things I hope to discuss with you a bit about is like really corporate power, particularly, cloaked with the protection of law, how corporations in particular define our work, food, and also our healthcare and healthcare decisions as well. And you like working with it, working within the healthcare industry and at public health advocates have an inside view. So I'm kind of like hoping to, get a little bit of sense of like where you see the biggest, like where you see the impact of corporate power here within your work and beyond.
It's the anchoring. So I'll take it philosophically and then I'll take it practically, right? So I think the influence of corporate power is that it's, and I think one of the most damaging things that capitalism does, and I know this is saying a lot, but it's the way that it robs our imagination and constrains what we believe is possible. And so that's where I see it, most prominently is just in, even when people are sick and tired and are fed up, there is a way they're like, but this will never happen. And they're not wrong in feeling, dejected and lacking in hope, because there's not a whole lot of promise that something would change but also I believe in the power of people, and I believe in the power of organizing, and I do believe that ultimately when it's people versus machines, that the people hopefully will win. And I think the same thing is true when it's people versus the corporate entities. But I think that's the philosophical thing that I see, is just like how it changes what we even believe is possible, what we think is reasonable, right? And so where I see is that they're anchoring, right? So if you go into a conversation and negotiation, there's this idea of whoever talks first loses, right? Or whoever anchors on a price first. That's kind of, you begin to then kind of orbit around that price. So if I say, hey, you have a car, I'll offer you $8,000, you're going to end up somewhere near $8,000 because I threw that amount out first, right? It's very rare that you're going to end up at $30,000 or two, right? You're going to end up somewhere in the $8,000 range. And similarly, they are anchoring our conversations around what's possible. So to use example of healthcare, because we're in a pandemic, they've anchored on their privatized healthcare being the only way to do things. And so even as we develop our public systems, we're always anchored on there being this external private entity running healthcare, and how do we, balance the needs of these two, disparate systems. When it comes to our food system, right, we're always anchoring on, well, what do businesses need to be able to do this? And I'm not anti-business. I do think that, people should be able to have, goods and services that they're able to provide to a community. But there is a constraint that should be placed on how much power they're able to amass. There should be a constraint on how they're able to exploit labor, what they have to provide to the people who are working for those businesses. And that should be the thing that we prioritize first. So I feel like my role in public health is really just, I sometimes feel like I'm not introducing new ideas at all. I'm introducing new priorities, right? I'm saying it's kind of like PEMDAS, to use a really like nerdy example of like, when you're doing math, you're taught order of operations, right? And you're taught parentheses first. You always do that. If you start with addition and subtraction, you're going to get the wrong answer if there are parentheses and exponents and other things. And I feel like the whole role of public health is to remind you PEMDAS, but the P is for prevention, right? Like, let's start there. Let's change our values around, like, where do we go? And so profit should be the last thing we're thinking about. It should be after we've done everything else. Just like emergency response should be the last part of safety that we think about after we've assured that we've prevented as many emergencies as we can. And so I think that's really the work that we're doing, is just like, how do we change around how we're thinking about things so we're prioritizing what's most important first?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's like speaks volumes into like what we at Move to Men have been doing within this movement. We're not just advocating, for this, for one amendment, the We the People amendment, as the end all be all solution. It's really a first step of opening the door to having the conversation. Because as you pointed out earlier, like, we live within a society that our discourse is literally dictated by those with the most money and concentrations of wealth, right? Which hands in within these corporations, and it's no more apparent than within the U.S. healthcare system, which, compared to other developed countries across the planet, we're the only ones that still do not guarantee healthcare as a human right, and have a for-profit healthcare system that literally prioritizes that property and profit above everything else. And like, California is kind of a startling example here as we deal with this pandemic, right?
Right. Absolutely.
So I'm curious to know too, like, we've seen this ongoing surge that we're going, like, that really began, let's be clear, like, it didn't begin in Thanksgiving. It began in Halloween and a little bit before that, right? Yep. And like, we're seeing now, like, we're now here in California going back under the level of COVID restrictions we had back in March, right? Yep. So I'm kind of curious, I want to hear your thoughts on that, and what, where you see is the key priorities that we should be addressing, but are kind of limited in that response given the current status of corporate rule.
So I'm going to, because we're having such a rich conversation and I see so many of the comments are around capitalism, I'm going to frame this response under capitalism, right? We all have dealt with now 9 months, and at this point, billions of dollars have changed hands in ways that maybe wouldn't have because of this pandemic. And we could have also made a decision that we were going to completely shut down the country for 3 weeks. We could have given everybody adequate preparation to be able to provide contactless delivery of food. We could have made sure that, all of our unhoused folks were housed during that time in hotels and motels and other places that were inside that had access to, hygiene supplies and plumbing. We could have done all of these things for way cheaper than doing this, pardon me, but half-assed approach that we've done for the last 9 months, and who knows how long it's going to continue. We still could have worked on developing a vaccine. We still could have done all the things that were happening afterwards, but we could have nipped in the bud how quickly this virus was transmitting if we had gotten everybody to go home, stay home, or created a home for them for this period of time to be able to stop the transmission of this virus. And people would have been far more adherent to a 3-week total shutdown, right? And I'm saying, like, shut down your work. Like, this is just, we're all just shut down. It's like old school holidays back in the day when you didn't have Black Friday sales starting on November 10th, right? Just like old school shutdown where like nothing is open, only essential things are available. Everybody has food and we just shut down. So that's part of the challenge, huge, right, is that we are prioritizing capital even in the middle of a pandemic. And so we have done everything we can to try to keep open the things that we think are going to keep the nebulous economy running. And instead of doing what was in everyone's best interest, that would have also been cheaper. And so we're always talking about the bottom line, but it's like, I often find that if we do the right things up front, it costs us less money overall. And so it's really frustrating to watch money be the reason why we don't do things when it ends up costing us more money in the long term. So here we are because we decided to politicize the basics, right, of just like how you manage a health crisis, because it had everything to do with capital and with who's in power and who is being most harmed by this. And so now we're facing the equivalent of people can call it sort of a 9/11 every day, and the number of people who are dying nationally from COVID, and it's all preventable.
All of it. Like that's the thing that really strikes me the most about this is like all of this is preventable, and we simply just refuse to actually take action to it because we thought, no, we need to keep like these numbers going. The short-term game is the key thing. And now it's like we're losing hundreds of thousands of people. Some of us, like those are very close to us. I unfortunately just learned that my uncle is one of those COVID patients that is dying in a hospital right now. And he was all about capitalist too. He was on that property focus too. And it's killing me right now that we're facing these questions when we didn't even have to from the jump. I wanted to go back to a comment that was raised earlier, about classism as enemy number one. I think to a great extent that is true, but being clear, classism is directly intersecting with racism and sexism here, especially during the pandemic. And honestly, Sacramento, I feel like is kind of like the microcosm that illustrates that, right?
Casteism is what we should begin to call it, is casteism, because I think casteism takes into account the way in which our identities are, and our intersectional identities are hierarchied and are valued in our society that we don't talk about. Class makes it seem like it's only socioeconomics, but it's caste that really makes the biggest difference.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely right. And none looks further when I'm looking at news in the day of kind of the corporate power that exists and also its dominance over the narrative that we actually here in Sacramento County, we had a board meeting where an urgency ordinance was being put up to actually hold local businesses and households accountable for blatantly violating COVID restrictions that have been exacerbating the surge, right? Yeah. And there was a group of protesters, anti-vaxxers who have been protesting against the restrictions, who were able to break into the county board meeting and occupy it for a certain number, about an hour or so, and ended up putting enough pressure to cost even that to the absolute benefit, the exclusive benefit of businesses, predominantly white-owned businesses and predominantly white communities who have seen the highest rates of infections across Sacramento County. That to me is the key, the textbook example, the local impact of corporate power here within that we're having that not only the business community pressuring our board of supervisors, our local elected officials, but also manipulating the public narrative and conversation so that we actually have people that are fighting against their own best interests.
Yep. Absolutely. I mean, that's the part that's scariest, right? Is if you take a misinformation campaign and pair it with the constraint on our imagination and pair it with, the way that we don't support people, right? So, I'm also a co-host on a podcast, Voices River City. And so we were actually talking about this really recently, what happened on Tuesday there are these like concentric circles of people, and I'm always trying to organize like how many people in this group also are in this group, right? And I think that there are people who are in the reopen the economy because they're like trying to survive because we've done nothing to help people. So going back to our example of like if we had made a decision to get people food and necessities for 3 weeks and had kept everything contactless, we also could have given people a certain amount of money. I've thrown out there, $5,000 per household or so for that period of time. Providing food and just saying, we're going to do this for this period of time, you could have cut down on a whole lot of panic because people would have been at home. They would have been, able to be safe. We could have found housing for the people and we would have given them some tangible, way to be able to take care of themselves. So they weren't feeling like they had to decide, am I going to prioritize my short-term health or am I going to prioritize my long-term livelihood? Because I think some of these people are people who are reasonable and are saying, you're not going to help me when this pandemic is over and I'm about to lose my shirt. And so I'm out here protesting because ultimately I know you don't care about me. And I don't know how else to survive. And I have both empathy and also frustration for those people because I feel like if we could just pull over a little bit to our side, we'd have the numbers. But nonetheless, I also have empathy for where they're coming from and what shaped their viewpoint in the first place.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I mean, that's like really, and that's the work in educating, right, about that. There was a quick question from one of our listeners about what do you think of the chances that we'll actually get full disclosure of the contents and production methods of the upcoming vaccine? Because that is a concern, right, among those folks as well. It's like, what are we approving right now?
Yes, absolutely. So I'm actually doing a deep dive over the next couple of weeks into the FDA and Pfizer and Moderna's documents. I've been very public about my plan not to take a position. I'm going to take the agnostic approach, which I think is the public health approach of doing this, which is I am not going to tell you whether you should or should not take a vaccine. I think that public trust has been so eroded, especially within the Black community, to which I am a member, but also just in general by Americans. I use as my example of that the fact that when it was announced that Donald Trump had COVID, there were a lot of very reasonable people who were like, I don't know if I believe this. And that was a reasonable response after 4 years of gaslighting. But just to recalibrate, none of you have ever had a friend come to you and say, hey, I was just diagnosed with diabetes or cancer or something. And you said, I'm not sure if that's true. Right. So that's just how far we've gone in terms of like questioning whether people have diseases is not a thing that reasonable people do. And yet very reasonable people were doing it because we've been lied to so much that what was true and what wasn't has been lost. So my role in this, and the role that I'm really encouraging other public health people to do, especially people who have a trusted voice, is to not try to encourage people to do one thing or the other, but to spend time actually demystifying some of the science and being really clear about what we do and don't know, being really clear and transparent about what the risk factors are, what the side effects are, so that people can ultimately make a decision for themselves. Because there is a lot of fear, I think, about this being, a messenger RNA vaccine, because there is no commercial equivalent to that that's ever been tried. And so that part is new. And that part is, has not been tested for as long, obviously, other than the recent trials. The research also is predicated on 17 years of research from the time that SARS, which is severe acute respiratory syndrome, came out in 2003. And so it's not as if this is like rushed in that sense, because there's a lot of foundational research that's been happening over the last 17 years to help get to this point. But it's also true that we have long-term questions about beyond 3 months, what is the just general level of immunity? Even if you trust this, will you need a booster? Is this going to be like your tetanus shot, which you need it every 10 years or more often? How many doses are we going to need to be able to confer full immunity? And what are the long-term consequences? So that's the role I'm going to try to play, is just trying to make sure that whatever information is made publicly available, that I'm able to, to share, to answer questions, and just to be as honest as possible. I'm not going to try to sell you on whether to or not to. I think that should be a personal decision. I believe consent is sexy, even when it's, outside of a bedroom. And so you should be both informed and have consent to whatever is happening to you. And I think we'll build trust if we take that approach.
Absolutely. I mean, that speaks volumes to our coalition's core principle of like dedication to political education, but also like, just education as a whole, ongoing and necessary to absorb the lessons, not just of history, but also the successes of our failures, particularly within the realm of people's-led movements and in general our current society, right? Yeah, I'm curious to know really, like, as the director of policy, like, what are some of the current proposals that are being out there, like, to kind of get us back on, like, get us on the right track and like really kind of bolster our education around this, because there has been a lot of misinformation, right, that is going, and like it's also part of our work to like counter that misinformation a bit, so that we get people the right, like, get the people the resources and solutions they need during this time. I'm curious to hear what you're working on.
Yeah, so part of what we're working on is obviously just like a basic, let's be really clear about what we do and what we don't know, the agnostic approach to outreach, and when it comes to just giving people basic information. We know that the stat is 77% of Americans don't have a high enough health literacy to be able to follow basic instructions, including things like following the instructions on a prescription label to take medication as prescribed. So, and that's not an indictment on us. It's not that we're silly or uneducated or anything like that. It's more so because there's a quality of science education, and then there's, our health classes don't cover that, right? Maybe they'll cover nutrition and physical activity and those kinds of things, but they don't talk to you about like, how do you make health decisions? And many of us don't have enough of a science background to really have what I like to call fully informed consent. We sign forms, people said words to us, but if we didn't understand and interpret those words in a way that helps us make a decision, that's not informed consent. And so what our real hope is to be able to give people enough information, enough marrying what you don't know with what's happening now, so that you are able to be in a position where whatever decision you're making, yes or no, you're clear on, the why of that, and it's not based on misinformation. So that's one thing we're trying to do around COVID. The other is to be able to try to mobilize resources. And Keyan, you and I have been, deeply involved in the Cares for the People Coalition. Shout out to Kula, our fearless, facilitator, because I know she doesn't like to be referred to as our leader. But there are ways that noticing what's been happening at the local level with the CARES dollars has allowed us to be able to mobilize around what's needed overall, and what is the state's responsibility to that. So there are going to be some pushes next year with the budget to really make sure that what's needed at the local level for all the public health departments that were chronically underfunded since the Great Recession are in place. And then also thinking about what are the structural barriers that we have. So how do we acknowledge racism as a public health issue? How do we mobilize to address that? What does a reparations or restorative justice framework look like when we're dealing with many of our institutions? Some of my colleagues work more in schools. Some of my colleagues, are working more in thinking about criminal justice, right? So we're all kind of trying to come together and say, what is our overall framework, and what are the basic principles of how we do this work and how we transform systems, so that their priorities are in alignment with what we'd hope to see. And I think I like Move to Amend so much. I'm such a fan of the work and just the concept, because for years I've been wondering, like, why don't we have another constitutional convention? Why can't we rethink and, question? I'm not saying we'll change everything about our current system. I'm sure there are plenty of things in it that we may decide to keep, but why can't we rethink everything that's built from a system? Because we anchored, once again, on a system that excluded everybody except white landowning men over the age of 21. And so what does it look like to reimagine a system that centers, Native sovereignty, that thinks about the people who were initially excluded and reconsiders everything, not just one piece, not just a particular amendment, but overall rethinks, like, how are we set up and structured and governed? And is that appropriate this many years later and with this many people that we now want to consider to have full participation in the process?
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. It really, that's been the question that our coalition has been seeking to answer and really raise attention to for the last 11 years. We've been for those that aren't familiar with our history, like Move to Amend got its start in the fall of 2009, just as the Supreme Court was deliberating on Citizens United versus Federal Election Commission. And because we recognized from the pattern of our history in the United States that the court has always been and prioritized property first, business first over human rights and our well-beings. And we recognized from jump that the Supreme Court was almost certain to go down on the side of corporations and recognizing they have a First Amendment right to free speech, including spending as much money as they want in independent political advocacy to advocate for that speech. So we've been from the beginning, we've been very clear to make sure that the We the People Amendment is not the end all be all, it's the first step. And along the way, we can't just think about, focusing in on just passing this one amendment, because the work really doesn't end there, right? It's really going to be opening the door for having a deeper conversation on what does a constitution, and thereby the system that comes from that constitution look like when it puts people and the planet first, right? It's led to the point where we are actually launching, as of yesterday, on the anniversary of the signing of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, we are launching a campaign or program, basically a project, to envision a more democratic and just U.S. Constitution.
Have we signed the Universal Declaration of Human Rights?
Have we signed the United States? No, we are. Yeah,
I was going to say. Oh shoot, we're making moves.
If only, right? Unfortunately, we are not direct signatories of it. Hence why we don't have healthcare as a human right. Hence why we don't have protection for motherhood and parental leave and so many other key articles that other majority of other countries around the world do recognize, but we're the ones that are the bastions of the bastion of democracy that doesn't recognize that, right? So we just launched a website yesterday, which you can check out, the new website, peoplesconstitution.us, and sign up and help us spread the word. Because really, you said it well. It's time that we start talking about what does a people-centered constitution actually look like, because we don't have it here. Our constitution was first and foremost written as a property rights document that added human rights as an afterthought. And because it failed to define who is a person worthy of its protections, it was used to explicitly exclude the vast majority of people. During the Revolutionary period, that was more than 90%, because only 5.8% of the population was actually a white male landowner over the age of 21. So I'm really glad that you are so well in alignment with us, and I really hope that you're going to join that conversation with us, which leads me to my key question is what does a people's a people-centered constitution look like to you? What are some of the key things that would be that you would want to see within a people's constitution?
Well, since we were talking about, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, I think it would be a human-centered constitution first and foremost. And so it would enshrine for us what our human rights are, and making sure that we have basic protections, and would codify an opportunity for us to be able to revisit, aspects of it at some interval, because I think part of the challenge is it was never intended to go this. The whole hope of this is that if this truly is an experiment, and if this truly is something that is people driven, then it should never have been intended for us to go this long without making changes to it, because the world has changed and we find ourselves frequently up against, what we're allowed to do because of policies and, because of rights that were enshrined at a time when the things we can do today were unimaginable. I always kind of think about it, what would happen if I were to just resurrect one of my, 7 times great, ancestors, and just be able to show them that here we are right now, right? Seeing each other on this piece of plastic that's sitting on this table inside, and we have lights and running water and public. I feel like I could blow their minds, right? Just drop somebody from 1870 into today. to watch us even be able to mouth off at the cops and look white people in the eyes when we speak to them, and like all of these things that have changed over time. And so we're living in a very different world. And so we need to rethink what are the rules of engagement. And we see that happen when new technologies or new ways of being come up. It's like, well, is it child porn if two teenagers are sending each other nude pics back and forth? Like, is that, is it intent to distribute because it happened over the internet? Like these are questions that were not in place when those laws were originally written, when intent to distribute was you printed it out and you put it in the mail, right? Like it's a different world today. And child pornography was not intended to be something where two 16-year-olds are exploring their sexuality, right? And so like that's the kind of thing where revisiting it allows us to be able to revisit. Privacy looks different when there are lots of things about you that are available on this web that people can download and get to, right? Like, so we have to rethink those protections and those considerations, I think, pretty regularly, especially given the pace of just how quickly things change. And so I think that's for me, that's part of what a people's constitution would look like. It would be really thinking about human rights and then thinking about how often would we come back together to reconsider human rights.
Absolutely. I mean, if you look at other countries and their own constitutional framework, many of which are modeled after ours here in the United States, like they change their constitutions every decade, every generation, basically. Like, it's something that we ourselves haven't done. We seem to take pride in, having the oldest constitution, like, in history. But at the same time, like, are we really adjusting it as the founders originally intended, which was to, replenish it and renew it from time to time to match the current generation, right? And because of that, is often led there is significant concerns around opening the document up to revision. Like there have been comments that coming in of concerns about any talk of a constitutional convention or amendment proposing convention even being dominated by right-wing Christian fundamentalists and just corporate sycophants and oligarchs that have been dominating the conversation. So I'm wondering too, like, what are your thoughts in terms of like how do we both counter that potential influence, which is almost certainly inevitable. There is a right-wing organization, that is actually like working hard to open up for a constitutional convention. And they only need 34 states in order to do that, but they're still pretty far. Like they still have a few states off. But how do we open up the conversation and not to mention make sure we're guaranteeing actual people, the ordinary people on the ground, and particularly people that have been left out of the conversation, women, Black, Indigenous people of color, the poor and queer and trans communities into that. I'm curious to your thoughts on it.
Yeah, I think one of the things that has always come to my mind is to talk first in the abstract about what are the philosophical principles that we're interested in, and then get into how do we protect those. And what I think is that what I sometimes think is, in general, a lot of people agree on what we want, right? We want to feel safe. We want a sense of privacy. We want a sense of autonomy. We want to be respected. We want those things. And then I think where we differ is, though, what the line is between where you respecting my privacy is also, you feeling like I'm, by my free speech, I am, coming out against, your beliefs, or you feel persecuted and attacked. And so what does that line look like? But I think we're in a better position to be able to talk about what that looks like once we've started with what are our core values, because I think that's a place where we do have a lot in common in terms of what we want to see for ourselves and how we want to feel. And then I think we take the hard work of what does that mean, and how do we make sure that what is good for one doesn't infringe on the rights of others. And so I think for some of those far right groups that often are saying, I want my rights to be protected, but then are infringing upon the rights of others, I think the questions would be, what is allowable, right? And so, I take marriage equality as a prime example of like, how, if you don't like it, don't have one, how is that infringing upon your right to be able to live your life as you see fit? Well, it's not. It's allowing other people to have their rights. And as long as we're not legislating your opinions, you're allowed to hold those opinions, but you're not allowed to codify them into the way the institutions work. And so I think those are the kinds of things that we would have to just I don't want to say agree to disagree on, but come to some basic terms of like what is and is not allowed. And how does that then, how then do we make that happen? And what things are allowed to be differences of opinion and what things are actually rights that need to be protected? You know, and I think we could come to that. I think I have faith in the people if we actually were able to renew some sense of hope in people that they actually could have a role. And if we were able to do some real level setting around the level of imagination. And I know that there are lots of activities people can do to help you like think outside the box, you know, think outside the corporate box, right? And so if we could really engage in that of just like, how do we, what would you love to see? How could we imagine this together? I think we could come up with something pretty dope, provided that it's not, you know, sponsored by corporate entity. Right.
Yeah, the revolution will not be advertised by Coke and will not be televised, you know, and it definitely sure will not be branded that, right? Yeah, I think like your thoughts speak particularly to my understanding of like what a constitution really is, which isn't just like a, you know, this all-powerful document that gives us our rights, but really it's a statement of principles, right? It's a social contract between the people that comprise the nation, because that is the nation, right? The United States is not just some entity, it is the people. And the Constitution itself is enshrining our values and principles directly within that document. That's what every constitutional amendment, that's what the Bill of Rights is supposed to be, a statement of principles of the rights that we, the people, retain amongst ourselves because we are living, breathing human beings. But we delegate some of our authority to government, which is supposed to be subordinate and accountable to us, which they discharge by writing laws on our behalf. But none of those laws, the Constitution itself serves as a constraint on the use of that power that we delegate to it, right? So with that conversation, like, you know, that's something that a lot of people I don't feel are educated to. Like, even like I certainly didn't have that upbringing from my own high school government classes.
Absolutely.
Like I had to take the advanced placement class in order to like really get into like the constitutional study within that. So it's understandable when a lot of people are thinking that this Constitution, looking at our Constitution as the Bible for America, and it, like just an immutable document that can't be changed unless the gods themselves come down to like to do it for us.
And I think that's part of the unfortunate value of having so much of a lack of separation of church and state. Because so I was raised, you know, in the Presbyterian church, and a real shout out to the church I was raised in, because one of the things that I've always appreciated about it is that we were encouraged at every level to read, to explore, to do something else. We were not, there were foundational principles of being a part of that church, which is that, we want to follow the Bible and this, but that does not mean you should not be a free thinking person, and you should go out and explore. And it was almost sort of the like Amish principle of like, look, go out and see, is that life for you? Like, and if it is, cool. And if it's not, like, we're not going to hold you back. And I think part of what the reason so many people see the Constitution as like the Bible is because that's the framework for how they understand information, right? There are founding documents that are to be unquestioned, and if you start your religious education, then you take that to school, you were taught that there is a set of things that you're supposed to believe and you shouldn't question them. And so then it's very emotionally charged when people ask you to question the things that you were taught in the same way of rote memorization to just believe and be part of your views of Americana. So I think that's one of the challenges. I also just want to point out that, built in, and again, I want to question all assumptions, built into this idea of, the Constitutional Convention is this idea that we got to stay together. And, as I say this fully aware that I'm like, very, very contently and intending to stay married for, the foreseeable future. But I broke up with a lot of people before I married my, my current spouse. And so I just think like, in fact, I broke up with all of them before I got together with my current spouse. So my breakup rate was 100% until, a decade ago. And so I say that to say that I don't see it as a foregone conclusion that we're all going to necessarily agree on what those human rights are. I see that, I consider the Civil War, though I don't think the Union was on the side of human rights as much as I would have liked them to have been. But I saw that as a fight over human rights. And so I don't have a problem if we can't all agree on the basic framework to break up and decide that we're not going to stay a union, because I think any good union is founded on having shared principles and values, whatever they may be. And so I'm not interested in staying married if there are people in our union who maybe don't share our values. And so I think this idea of having states that all have to share, if we can't agree on a framework, then maybe we don't need to be states. Maybe we need to allow for some secession without, without initiating a civil war, and just what did Gwyneth Paltrow call it? A conscious uncoupling.
Okay. Right, like this, like it's not the first time that countries have done that, and like it is definitely possible to like have that conversation. But we need to have that conversation first, if we're going to like really think through some of that. And it brings to mind too one of a quote in guiding philosophy that I really take to heart from the late people's historian Howard Zinn. We were not born critical of existing society. There was a moment in our lives, or month, or year, when certain facts appeared before us, startled us, and then caused us to question beliefs that were strongly fixed in our consciousness, embedded there by years of family prejudices, orthodox schooling, imbibing of newspaper, radio, and television. This would seem to lead to a simple conclusion: that we all have an enormous responsibility to bring to the attention of others information they do not have, which has the potential of causing them to rethink long-held ideas. And I think that's really like what I hope folks at home and are listening and that continue to engage with us really take to heart, of like really rethinking that. It really just, like we're not immutable and nothing lasts forever, and it's okay for things to change. We just need to talk about it and be willing to embrace that change, and as well as to hand off to future generations to carry our legacy forward, how they see it and when.
Absolutely.
So with that, like we're going up to an hour now, and I want to get your thoughts too of and feel free for folks at home that are listening to chime in as well of what are some things that have happened that is either in the works or has happened in the past week that is inspiring you in this current moment that we're in.
I'm always inspired by the people, right? People, because it's always the people who have the most on their plates, who have the most, additional responsibilities, who step up to the plate and say, this is important and I want to be a part of it. And so I am always inspired by that. I am, I think this year, as devastating as it has been, is also a testament to people's willingness to step up, to pay attention, and to push for things. And so, while we didn't see all the great wins we would have wanted to, I think we planted some really, really well germinated seeds that will yield harvests in the future. I think we helped to, set some anchors in some places where, previously the anchoring had not been as strong. And so that rope is going to pull, right? And so, I'm looking forward to that. I think, looking at, our county, we have, an interim CEO who is, vastly, I think, better than the one we had before. I think I can say that without
low bar one.
Right. I was going to say, he was in a league of his own in terms of just how terrible he was. And so I'm seeing some, the county passed the racism as a public health, resolution. I think there are some things that are happening that, we should be proud of, and that are a testament to people pushing. I think even the fact that the CARES Act money was blown up the way it was, and that some money was given to public health, came out of, the push that people gave. I think also, if I'm looking at the state, or at the city, here we have, we're going to have 3 new city council members that are going to be joining council. That's a third of the membership. And so that changes some of the dynamics. And so I think that there are some things on the horizon that are the result of some good people power, and of some good, strong community organizing that we can look to. And did we change, the entire planet? No. But did we change the world? Absolutely. Because changing the world is one decision at a time, and lots of decisions were made this year. And so I'm trying to look on the bright side while not losing the energy to keep pushing forward.
You said it, Flo. That's really where you're speaking my language and speaking my mind right now of like where I'm at with it. Like people first and foremost do inspire me, even if we don't see those see that energy and our efforts translate into solid policy. I'm seeing more and more communities coming together that were relegated to the minority status and just considered as an afterthought. Really coming together and just assert its interests as well as its leverage and power. Particular, a lot of people are paying attention and focused in at the federal level with the congressional election and the presidential election, but really, I mean, the real work and the real power really always continues to lie from the ground up. The local level is really where it's at, and here in Sacramento, there is a community that is coming together in ways I haven't seen since I moved here, and it's immensely inspiring to work with you, with people at People's Budget, Decarcerate Sacramento, Anti-Police Terror Project, and so many more, or even our local affiliates here in Sacramento for Move to Amend, are really just engaging in transformative work. And that's really where the change is going to come from, regardless of where Congress is at. And we as a people need to be continue to stay focused in that and connect the dots, work in a multi-pronged strategy to really make sure that the pressure is felt from the ground up, because we're not depending on Congress anymore. And I really am inspired, particularly with people within local communities, state communities, and even at the federal level too, those new progressives like Cori Bush that just got put into Congress, really not kowtowing to rules of decorum that the establishment of both parties have long maintained, and are really pushing back on this narrative too about what we can do, what's electable, and what's politically feasible. So with that, I really appreciate the conversation. I just have a couple of announcements to make for folks that are listening at home. Movie night, Move to Men's movie night is coming up this Friday, next Friday, December 18th. We are going to be showing Trading Places. So join us for another movie night where we screen one of the best comedies of the 80s that makes us laugh while highlighting income inequality, insider trading, systemic racism, and its intersections with classism, among other social justice issues here in the United States. And afterwards, for those of you that tune in, we'll be having a lively discussion led by Move to Men's national board member and film aficionado, Daniel Lee. So I wholly encourage you to tune in for that this Friday for a free film. Also, too, of course, the website launch that I mentioned earlier. We Move to Mend, two pro-democracy human rights groups, Democracy Unlimited, Move to Mend, launched our project to envision a democratic and just constitution. So check it out. Our new website at peoplesconstitution.us, and sign up and help us spread the word, because really it's time to talk about a People's Constitution. So we have an upcoming webinar, Building People Power, Lessons from Organized Labor to Pass the We the People Amendment, this Tuesday, January 12th, or I'm sorry, not this Tuesday, but at the beginning of the year, there'll be our upcoming webinar, first thing, Tuesday, January 12th at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. So sign up and register for that webinar, movetomend.org/webinars. And of course, please let us know how you're what you're interested in, and really join this movement for ways to get involved and support Move to Mend by signing the petition at movetomend.org/motion. Also, if you're looking to engage and deepen your political education as well as your anti-oppression analysis, check out Move to Mend's movement education program at movetomend.org/education3. And if you support this work and want to see a new constitutional amendment and potentially a new constitution, help us by keeping this movement going by donating to Move to Mend. Just a reminder that we on staff have been working as volunteers since COVID-19 first put us under lockdown. And we are, thanks to your generous donations and continued support, we've actually managed to rehire 3 of our staffers to full-time positions. But folks like myself are still working as volunteers for this movement because we believe that strongly within this campaign and the need to keep this movement going no matter what crisis we're currently dealing with. So if you can, anything that you can spare, go to movetomen.org/donate and help us keep this movement going. And with that, Flo, is there any last minute thoughts or comments or even plugs you want to put in before we go?
Just please stay at home to the extent you can. If you can't, stay away from other people. Wear a mask. Please be safe. This is real, and we are certainly peaking right now, and so we need to do everything we can to be as safe as possible. So,
seriously, like stay at home, practice social distancing, wash your hands, and wear your mask. Says we want you to be with us as long as humanly possible. And much love and appreciation to all of you. Stay safe out there. Thank you so much, Flo, for joining us for this insightful conversation. Hope you can join us again soon.
You would love it. Thank you so much. This was great. It was a lot of fun.
Right on. Take care, everyone.